Hello and welcome to the short tutorial on Functional Skills Maths exam tips. Follow these tips and you will have a better chance of passing your exam. So I'm just going to give you an overview of some things that you need to be aware of when carrying out your tests, which you will be taking very shortly. First of all, just to clarify that within the Functional Skills Maths test, there are basically 3 tasks to complete. Task 1 will include number calculations, which will cover percentages, fractions, ratios, multiplication, division, typical basic number crunching that we need to be aware of and apply to given situations. The second task will be concerning shape and space, where we will need to work out perimeter, area and volume of various shapes and apply those to everyday situations given in the exam. And the third task will be about data handling, where we will be covering mean, median, and mode and range. Probability will be in there as well, and as part of that data collection, data handling activity, you will be expected to create charts from that information. So, on to some tips. One other thing actually though, just to remind you that in an exam, you can do these questions in any order. You don't have to start with the first one. So whichever one that you're strongest with, that's the one you should do first. It's about accruing points and getting points to pass the exam. So do them in any order that suits you. Okay, on to the tips then. The first tip is really concerning perhaps an obvious thing, but we do need to be ensured that we read the question carefully. Make sure that you understand what you're being asked to do. Make sure that you highlight key points, because if you don't, that will lead to inaccurate work and ultimately the wrong answer, which will lead to less points. So the remedy is, obviously, read the questions. If you're doing a paper-based exam, then highlight the various parts that are important. If you're doing it on the computer, then make sure you have some paper with you to make notes about the important parts of each question so that you know that you're covering the right things. Number 2, the second tip to think about, again, fairly obvious but not always taken up. You can use a calculator. In fact, I would encourage you to do so. If you're doing it on the computer, there will be a calculator on the screen. If you're doing it on paper, make sure you've got a calculator that you're familiar with, comfortable with using, and that you are using it. And when you're using a calculator, it's always important to look at what's being tapped in, because while you think you've tapped the button, make sure the number appears on the screen, because it may not, and therefore you will get wrong answers. And if you don't do that, again, wrong answers will lead to lack of points. So the remedy for this particular challenge is make sure that you are using a calculator. Tip number 3 concerns about what I mentioned earlier, which is doing the task in any order. You do not have to do them in order, but when you do pick a task, make sure you go through that task from start to finish. So within the task, stick to the order, because they are often linked. They follow on. One answer leads to the next question, where you will use that answer to do another question. So you need to do that. If you don't do that, you will drop marks. And if you don't follow through, your errors will be accumulated and you will lose marks for that. So do the question in the set order. Make sure that you understand what it's doing, because each question will be linked within the task. Tip number 4 then. If you are doing labels, if you're doing diagrams and charts, make sure you are using a ruler to get the chart looking neat and tidy, and also make sure you label it. Often people will make charts and just create the bars but not tell us what they are. No title on the chart, no description of the axes, X and Y axes. Make sure that they're labelled properly and that you use a ruler to make sure they're neat and tidy. This won't apply if you're doing a computer-based exam, because you will use the tools on the screen, but if you're doing it on paper, that's what you need to make sure that you're doing. Because if you don't, again, you will drop marks. There are often 5 or 6 marks for these types of questions, and if you haven't labelled everything, then you will lose marks. And that's what you don't want to do in an exam. So make sure, again, to clarify, squared paper, you should be given that. A ruler to draw straight lines. Neatness can be an issue, so you need to make sure that you avoid that. Okay? You will get more points, it's as simple as that. Label your diagrams in full. That means any keys, the title, the axes, whatever it is that's appropriate, you must label it. Number 5. Make sure that you are familiar with mean, median, mode and range. They only come up in the one question, but often people get confused with what they are. So you need to understand it, because if you don't, you might calculate the wrong average and therefore get the wrong answer. So you need to know which one to use. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this, but there is a simple rhyme that you can learn that helps you to understand it, and here it is on the screen. Hey diddle diddle, the median's the middle. You then add and divide for the mean. The mode is the one you see the most, and the range is the difference between. If you're not sure of that rhyme or you want to learn that, then just play this part of the video again just to make sure that you understand it. Okay? Number 6, moving on. Don't miss or ignore the question that's at the end of every task, which asks you to check a question. All right? This doesn't mean write the same calculation again. It doesn't mean writing I checked it on a calculator. These relatively are easy marks to get. There's 2 marks for each task, so that's 6 marks in total. Checking a task means that you do something that you have reversed on the original calculation. If you don't do it, sometimes that 2, 4 or 6 marks can be the difference between a pass and a failure. So do those because they are fairly easy. You do the check by reversing the original calculation. So if you had a multiplication sum, you pick one and do a division of the answer into one of the other numbers, and you will get the correct check. You do need to physically write out the check. You don't just tick the question that you've checked, you actually write the sum out in reverse so that you can confirm that you understand what they mean by checking. There's 2 points for that. And tip number 6, make sure that you keep an eye on the time. For the functional skills exam, you're allowed 1.5 hours. There are 3 tasks. So that suggests around about half an hour for each task. But if you get stuck on one and the time runs on, you can lose track of time and then not do the ones that you are more comfortable with. Okay? So that suggests 30 minutes a task. If you don't do all the questions, or as much as you can, that will mean that you have a possibility of failing. Okay? You don't need to get 100%, but you certainly need to get a significant percentage, usually 60 to 67% of the paper. So do the questions that you're most confident with first. Okay? Maybe question 3, for example, is the one that you're more comfortable with. Do that first, give you some confidence, you'll get it done quicker, but keep an eye on the clock. That hour and a half can run by quickly if you're stuck on a particular question. Do the easy ones first, build the points up, and then work on the ones that you find hardest. But make sure you try and do all of the questions as much as possible. Ultimately, this functional skills passing of these tests is down to you. You need to do your own research and study at home, not just relying on what happens in the lessons. You need to do as much of that as possible. The more you do out of class, the better your chances, most definitely. There are some useful revision guides on the Cube, so log on and use them. You can find stuff on all various topics under the Functional Skills course on Cube, so please make use of that. There's some time and effort gone into put them together to help you pass your test. Okay, that's the end of this short session on exam tips. Follow those tips and you will have a better chance of passing your test. Good luck and well done.